So again, welcome everyone. This is all about Range Calc and Plan. We're going to cover a lot of the different features of Range Calc in this webinar, so we're glad you're here. I'm also joined by Shane Duckett from our support team. Shane will be handling the Q&A and the chat, monitoring the chat to make sure nothing bad is going on in the chat, but I know you guys are going to behave yourselves. We were talking before, we will record this webinar as we do all webinars that Holistic Plan sponsors. What we'll do is we'll send an email out either today or tomorrow with a link to the recording of this webinar. So if you're not able to stay the whole time, don't worry, we got you covered. We'll make sure that you receive that recording to your inbox. Excuse me. So before we get started, we were talking about favorite Easter candy. So whether or not you celebrate Easter, it's kind of hard to avoid the Easter candy all on the shelves. So feel free to drop down in the chat what your favorite Easter candy is, just to make it official, because this is what we do at Holistic Planets. We do polls. So I'm just going to leave that poll up. Hopefully it stays kind of in the background just to see. So hopefully it's not in the way, but we're going to go ahead and get started with Range Calc. And if we have time, we'll take a look at the results and see what it looks like. All right, so without any further ado, let's just jump right into Plan, and let's start looking at some Range Calc tools. All right, Shane, can you see my screen? Is everybody? We got
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to start with, we have, as you know, at Plan, we have a lot of great demo names. This is Reggie and Regina Range Calc. Yes, they are a real couple. And as you might have guessed, they met online, maybe in a tax planning date chat, something like that. But Reggie and Regina, they're age 67 and 65. We started a standalone scenario for them. We're going to jump right into that scenario analysis for them. Actually, we have it open here. So let me back up and you just jump right into Range Calc. All right, so now we're in scenario analysis. This is something where, so we do have another webinar all about scenario analysis and Range Calc. We're going to jump right in, just assuming you know a little bit about scenario analysis in this webinar. If you have any questions about scenario analysis and how it works, highly recommend that webinar. You can get to it from your dashboard. So when we look at Range Calc, I've created a basic scenario here for Reggie and Regina. Remember, they're age 65 and 67. We have some interest income, we have some dividends, some IRA distributions, some pension income, some Social Security, and that's about it for Reggie and Regina. So you can see they have taxable income of $13,250. They're in the 10% bracket. Relatively minor or small tax bill at $325. So now we're going to run Range Calc. So how do we run Range Calc? It's in here under the three dots. So if you click on these three dots to the right of scenario title, you'll see the available tools. These are internal options, so pay no attention to the man behind the curtain here beneath that line. But if you look up here, you will see Solve for Max. Solve for Max is kind of the easy button, which is a alternative to Range Calc. It's going to tell us just in sheer dollar numbers, the next change in effective rate, or the amount of the amount of ordinary income you can add before you have a change in the effective rate, the amount of ordinary income you can add before you change the Medicare premium, and same thing for long-term gains. We're not going to use Solve for Max, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Range Calc. And so what we're going to do, again, click those three dots. We're going to open up Range Calc. And again, this is for that baseline scenario that we just looked at with the income characteristics that we went through. So when we come into Reggie and Regina's Range Calc is a tool that shows you the effects of adding additional income, be it ordinary income, which is this graph up top. We also have a graph at the bottom, capital gains. So naturally the chart up top is going to show you the effects of adding additional ordinary income, and the graph at the bottom is going to show you the effects of adding additional capital gains or long-term capital gains, qualified income of some kind. So here, as we kind of orient ourselves to what this graph looks like, we'll call out the baseline taxable income and the baseline ordinary income in this first graph. As we kind of navigate around two, you'll see that we have a range low end, which means kind of like your minimum on the x-axis, the range high end, which is the maximum of the x-axis, and the step width is the incremental changes of income that we're looking at. So what we're looking at is the scenario as we laid it out, as we kind of reviewed it earlier. they already have $13,250 of taxable income as entered in that scenario. So that 13,250 is represented by the zero line here on the x-axis. This represents an additional 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so forth of additional ordinary income. So you can see as you add additional ordinary income, as you scroll to the right on the x-axis, you will see the effects of adding that additional ordinary income. And what we're going to do first off in this scenario is we're going to look at some basic colors that you typically will see. If you ever have any questions about the colors that you are seeing, we have this what does it mean tab here on the right side of the screen. If you pull that out, you can navigate to some of these more commonly seen items, or spikes as some people will call them. What does the purple mean? What is the red, brown? So whatever color you're seeing on the graph, we try to have a kind of a quick reference there about what each of these are. So you don't have to, so you just have a quick reference point to go back to. So what we're seeing here with Reggie and Regina, is we have some purple, some light blue, some red, and some brown. These are some of the more common colors that you see on a range calc graph. We are going to kind of blow your mind a little bit and look at a rainbow of colors on a different example here, but we just want to start basic and build on that. So if you remember, Reggie and Regina had Social Security income. What we're seeing here is that they're in the 10% ordinary income tax bracket, as evidenced by that light blue color. I probably should have shown you this, but here we have a key or a legend as to what each of those colors represent. So light blue is going to be your ordinary income tax impact, capital gains, Social Security phase-in, and net investment income tax, at least for this scenario. You'll also see the total federal tax impact is represented by this black line, which is sitting on top of the graph as we go down the line, down the x-axis. Okay, so Reggie and Regina, they have baseline taxable income of $13,250. Their baseline ordinary income is $32,50. What that means is they have $10,000 of qualified income there is what that means. So their ordinary income that they're starting out with is $3,250. That's represented here by the zero. If we add an additional $1,000, let me just back up. We add an additional $1,000, we can see that their net effective rate on that additional $1,000 of ordinary income is going to be 18.5%. That's evidenced by that top line where it says 18.5%. You can see that components of that are the 10% marginal rate on ordinary income and that 8.5% purple area, which represents the Social Security tax phase-in. What this is telling us is that as we add additional ordinary income to Reggie and Regina's scenario, we're going to have more and more of their gross Social Security benefits become eligible for taxation. If you remember, there's for the rules around taxation of Social Security, it can be anywhere from 0 to 85%. What you are seeing here when this purple area ends on the graph, this doesn't mean that they're no longer taxed on Social Security benefits. What this is telling you is that incremental, or that the next incremental addition of ordinary income does not incur any additional phase-in of Social Security taxation. And that's because at this point in the graph, we have reached the 85% mark of taxation. Once 85% of your benefits are taxed, they don't tax anymore, right? So that's the cap. So what you're seeing right here is when that purple area ends on the graph, that's representative of 85% of their Social Security benefits becoming taxable. And beyond that point, no additional Social Security benefits are taxable. So that explains that purple area. As you can see, they're still in the 10% bracket. Eventually, we jump up to where they're in the 12% bracket. This is representative of jumping from that 10% bracket to 12. You'll notice they stay in that 12% bracket along with this additional income until we start to hit a red area. This red area, this is also a pretty common question that we get in support is, where is 27% coming from? Essentially what we're having happen here, even though they're still in that 12% ordinary income tax bracket, their long-term capital gains rate is based on taxable income. And there is a 0% long-term capital gains rate when you start out on the bottom. What you're seeing with this red area on the graph is that you reach a point when your taxable income reaches above that point where you cross over from 0% long-term capital gains rate to 15% capital gains rate. Even though you're adding ordinary income, you're having the effect of pushing qualified income from that 0% rate for long-term capital gains to that 15% rate for long-term capital gains. The width of this red area is going to be equal to the amount of qualified income you have in the scenario. So in this case, again, remember we have 13,000 of taxable, or excuse me, 13,250 of taxable income, 3,250 of ordinary income. That means that we have $10,000 of qualified income. So what we'll see is around 74, 75,000. We start to push that qualified income from 0 to 15%. And once we get to approximately, again, you won't see it match up exactly here because we're going in $1,000 increments, and there is a little bit of attribution, which is why you see a slant there and not just a straight vertical line. But roughly that the width of that red area is going to be equal to the amount of your qualified income. So $10,000 is being pushed here from the 0% long-term taxable gains rate bracket into the 15% bracket. That's why you're seeing that 27% total federal tax impact. Because essentially what you have happen is you have $12,000, or excuse me, 12% of tax on that ordinary income as you add it. And on top of that, you're stacking an additional 15% on that capital gains tax on that qualified income that's jumping from 0% to 15%. They sit on top of each other. So your effective rate, if you were to add $75,000 of ordinary income, or let's just jump up to where it's simple here, 77,000, your effective rate is going to be 27% on that $1,000 slice of $77,000. It's also 27% until you have pushed the entirety of that qualified income into the 15% bracket. Similar to Social Security, when that color ended, the end of this red area does not mean that you no longer have any long-term capital gains taxes assessed on the return. It simply means that by adding additional ordinary income, you're not exposing this client to any additional capital gains taxes. So essentially what has happened here is that we've pushed all of the $10,000 of qualified income from the 0% bracket into the 15% bracket. At that point, we are only subject to ordinary income taxes on that next section of income until we get to this brown section. This is net investment income tax. If you remember back to the rules around net investment income tax, this is calculated on Form 8960, and it is equal to the lesser of investment income or the amount of income over the threshold. Reggie and Regina are a married couple. The threshold for married filing jointly couples is $250,000. So what we're seeing here, even though it says 197,013 here, the MAGI for net investment income tax, this is the point where it reaches $250,000. So what you will see, similarly to how the width of this red area was $10,000, the width of this net investment income tax is approximately $16,000 or $17,000 of width right here in this section. That's because they have approximately that amount of net investment income that's subject to net investment income tax. So we'll see that additional 3.8% of net investment income tax be assessed on all investment income once you're over that $250,000 threshold of again, MAGI as calculated for net investment income tax. Kind of a side note and just an added bonus today. One of the things that we run into a lot is that when folks ask us, what exactly is their MAGI? It depends. Like any good tax answer, it depends. There's about a half dozen or more calculations for modified adjusted gross income, depending on the application. For the purposes of net investment income tax, which we have calculated for you within Holistic Plan, at approximately $198,000 of additional ordinary income, you're starting to cross that threshold of $250,000 for Reggie and Regina. The entirety of their net investment income is subject to that 3.8% net investment income tax. And again, it disappears not because they don't have investment income and that's not assessed, but adding ordinary income beyond this point does not subject any additional or does not impose any additional net investment income tax. That's because you have used up. Remember, net investment income tax is the lesser of net investment income or the amount of the threshold. At this point where the brown disappears on the graph, we have exhausted all the net investment income. So that is the lesser of that or the amount of the threshold. And that's why you see that disappear. All right, a couple more features before we hop down to capital gains. You'll see these vertical dotted lines here. These represent the MAGI thresholds. Again, different calculation for MAGI when it comes to Medicare Part B and D annual increases, or their IRMA surcharges, as they're more commonly known. IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. Love those acronyms that we use here in with the IRS and with Medicare and government in general. But what you're seeing here is that once you cross approximately $150,000 of additional ordinary income, you're subjecting this client to the first IRMA surcharge trigger or threshold, and that's going to result in an additional premiums for Medicare Part B and D combined of approximately $994 a person per year. So this is, again, Medicare Part B and D annual increases per person. So this is joint return. Their income is figured on a joint basis. So this would mean that both Reggie and Regina would incur Medicare Part B and D surcharges of approximately $994 a year. Something to keep in mind, again, Reggie and Regina, they're 65 and 67. This is relevant to them. If you have younger clients that are nowhere near this Medicare eligibility age, again, considering the 2-year look back with Medicare, so really age 63 is when this starts coming into play, unless they have Medicare for another reason, such as being eligible for Social Security disability. In that case, you qualify for Medicare as a participant, but those can show up for you here. If you want to change some of these items on the graph, if you go to advanced settings, you can show the additional Medicare increases. You can uncheck that box and it'll release those or hide those dotted lines. You can also show state tax. So I'm going to check both of these so we can see the lines are showing up. I'm a native of South Carolina. I love South Carolina. So Reggie and Regina decided to retire South Carolina. It's a great state. So you'll see the state tax here of South Carolina sitting on top of the federal. So this would mean that, again, just to kind of go back, adding $105,000 of ordinary income would subject Reggie and Regina to their marginal rate on that $1,000 slice here in this one spot would be 22 for federal, but 6.4 for South Carolina. So the total federal and state combined marginal tax rate on this income would be 28.4%. Again, so you go to advanced settings, you can check either one of those or uncheck them. Some of these are in beta, but you can look at total tax, which is equivalent to line 24 of the tax return. I wouldn't mess too much with these until you get a really firm grasp of range calc. But instead of ordinary income, if you have a client with incentive stock options, you can also look at a range calc to see how much ordinary income you can add, or excuse me, how much preference item related to incentive stock option exercises you can do and keep them under AMT. So that's another feature within that range calc tool. Okay, so that's advanced settings. You can change the range low end. This is a trick that you can go back and look at. You can change this to a negative number, and you can actually, what you'll see when you do that, again, I'm leaving everything the same. You click on update chart, and now your zero here is starting here at 0. So again, this is -5. This is the effect of taking away $10,000 of ordinary income instead of adding it from 0, it's taking it away from 0. So again, a lot of tools in here. Buckle up, and if you're not ready for this, you can wait. You don't have to do this, but you can change this range low end to a negative number and show the effects of taking away ordinary income instead of adding it to. And again, 0 is always going to be equivalent to this baseline taxable income, which we are pulling directly from the scenario in scenario analysis. I'm going to put that back to 0 just for posterity. All right, and so now we're going to look here at the bottom. This is the capital gains chart. You can see that these match up pretty well. They're about the same amount of ordinary income versus capital gains income. Again, we're adding capital gains here. Why are we seeing ordinary income and Social Security? It doesn't matter if you're adding capital gains or ordinary income. Social Security uses a definition they call combined income, which uses AGI. And since qualified income and qualified dividends are added to that total on the 1040, and you don't get the benefit of backing out the gains that are qualified for that long-term capital gains rate, that doesn't happen until line 16 on the 1040. So because AGI continues to go up, even if it's qualified dividend, even if it's a long-term capital gain, it still gets added into that total for AGI. So when you add capital gains, you are still subjecting additional Social Security to taxation, which is why you see the light blue and purple here on this chart for that. Again, same thing, adding capital gains. At this point, you've completely blown through the 0% long-term capital gains rate, and the remaining will be taxed at 15%. And again, NIT comes into play here as well. All right, I'm going to back out of this one really quick. One thing I did want to show, I've kind of cheated and put this ahead of schedule so we could see this, but we use this a lot of times in support just to kind of get an idea of what's going on. But if you can see, this is the one we just looked at in scenario analysis. I'm going to use the comparison tool. So if you haven't seen this before, if you hover between any two scenario titles, we'll bring up this delta, which is the Greek symbol for change. You click on that. It'll show you the difference. This comparison column pops through, and we'll show you the difference in income. So we've added $1,000 of raw conversion income. That's ordinary income. But you can see the effect this has on taxable Social Security. It's still $18,000 is gross, but we've added $850 of taxable Social Security. So if you're not aware of this, Range Calc is really great at helping you find these tax torpedoes like Social Security and like the red one we just looked at. But essentially what you're doing by adding $1,000 of raw conversion income, you're also adding $850 of taxable Social Security. The net effect of that, as you go down here, you're increasing total income by $1,850, AGI by $1,850, and taxable income by $1,850. Remember, Reggie and Regina at this point in this original scenario, they're in the 10% bracket. So $1,850 times 10% is $185. My third grade math teacher would be proud. 185 times 10%, or excuse me, 1,850 times 10%, maybe she won't be proud. 1,850 times 10% is going to get you your total tax of 185. And that's why you're seeing a total tax of 185 divided by your $1,000 as you enter in the scenario. That's where we get the 18.5% net effective rate on that $1,000 slice. So that's a good thing just to try if you're ever in range or in scenario analysis. You can add $1,000 to that to another scenario, show a comparison, and see why that effective rate is the way it is. So that's just a tip. We're also going to bring in something a little more complicated now. I know we're about 20 minutes in, or about 25 minutes in here. So got 20 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to some of the more exotic range calcs you might see here from time to time. So what have I done here with, I'm just going to put this back in the scenario bank. If you haven't seen this feature before, click on the three dots. The three dots are where it's at for a lot of things. You can move it to the bank. It moves it off of the screen, and it's sitting here in this scenario bank where you have this notification symbol. If you ever want to move scenarios off the page and declutter it, if you're presenting in a meeting and you only want to show them a certain number of scenarios, you can utilize the bank to do that. You can click on any of these and move them back into the main page. But so what we're going to look at here is I'm going to look at the difference between these two. Just to show you the difference between these, I've taken away the pension and annuity income. I've added some more Social Security income. We've added some short-term capital gains. We've added a long-term capital loss. Change their total income, their standard, they've gone to itemized deductions. And I'm trying to see what else we did. We threw in a foreign tax credit for Reggie and Regina based on their income. Residential energy credits, they installed some windows, right, to get them a tax credit. And one thing you don't see in here, we also added, Rebecca's going to take an art class for $6,000, which is eligible for the lifetime learning credit, which is a non-refundable tax credit for education purposes. So Rebecca decides she wants to take an art class, $6,000. That's going to generate a credit for her down the line. All right, so again, just to kind of show you the differences in what we did on this scenario, some of the things we added. Let's go and look at range calc for this scenario, and you're going to see, as the name implies, you can see a rainbow of colors on this range calc graph that are a little bit different than what we saw in the previous edition. So again, we've covered the purple for Social Security already. We've covered the red and we've covered the brown. So I'm not going to go over those again. Also, you can see the Medicare surcharges coming into play here as we increase income. But we've got a whole lot more colors here showing up for Reggie and Regina. So what's the case here? Well, we see we can add 13,000, roughly, let's just say 12,000 of ordinary income to their baseline tax. So again, their baseline taxable is zero. Why is that? Well, in this scenario, they have adjusted gross income, or excuse me, adjusted gross income of 43,000. Their itemized deductions are more than enough to take care of that taxable income. So they actually have negative taxable income of approximately $11,000, as you can see. That's why when you come into the range calc graph, we can get to $11,000 or $12,000 before we see any tax effects start to kick in. And so then we start having some fun colors show up on the graph. We have purple and light blue, which we went over. Another thing I threw into this scenario just to show how it's affected. We included deductible medical expenses for Reggie and Regina. That is tied to a floor, right? You can't deduct medical expenses that are not above that 7.5% of AGI floor. Once we start adding enough income where AGI is north of zero, we're starting to increase that 7.5% floor for AGI. So gradually, as we add ordinary income, which adds to AGI, we're bumping up that floor for medical expenses to be deductible. So that teal color represents the loss or the phase out of that medical expense deduction on Schedule A. That's why you'll see this teal color continue on entirely through this point here. And at this point, what you're seeing, the end of that teal graph or the teal color on the graph, is illustrating that now all of their medical expenses are beneath that 7.5% AGI floor. Therefore, none are above it and are therefore no longer deductible on Schedule A. So that's what that teal color represents here. So what about some of these areas below the graph here? So we got a lot of tax credits going on for Reggie and Regina. Purposely, I threw these in so they would help explain this. These are tax credits phase in. Right? You'll notice we do not highlight what these are. Right? You would need to go back in the scenario to take a look and see what those are. But I know just by the scope of it, we have a $1,000 non-refundable tax credit, $3,000 residential energy credit. And again, we're not seeing a credit for education credits because they don't have enough income yet. We'll see that in just a minute. So this small sliver right here represents the $1,000, right? You can kind of, by process of elimination, this is the most narrow one. So this is when you have the barn tax credit phased in. Why is it being phased in? It's a non-refundable tax credit. We don't start generating a tax bill until we start phasing in some Social Security taxation. We lose some of that medical expense deduction. All right, so this means we're generating a tax bill, but it's completely being eaten up by non-refundable tax credits. Then we start showing up with this yellow, or let's just call it gold section here in the graph. We continue to add more income, but now at this point, we're able to phase in some of that education credit from those art classes that Rebecca's taking. And so that additional income is still being eaten up by a tax credit. And then finally, that's used up, and we have another credit in green show up, and that's your $3,000 residential energy tax credit being used. At some point, you add enough income and create enough of a tax bill that all the credits are used up and are exhausted. That's when you start to see this black zero total federal tax impact. You'll see that go from zero, and now we're looking at a positive number. This is where they start to actually incur a tax bill. And you can see that follows through on the top of the graph as we saw before, similar to the last graph. All right. right? And then we see this gold section show up again, but now it's on top. What does that mean? There is a phase in for non-refundable there's a phase in for any non-refundable credit, right? Because you have to have a tax bill for a non-refundable tax credit to be utilized, which is the opposite of refundable, which means, let me just take a step back. Non-refundable, you have to have a tax bill. The non-refundable credit cannot reduce your tax bill beneath zero. It can't generate a tax refund for you. Refundable one can. These are non-refundable credits. So they have used those up. They phased those in, but at some level of income, which is right here where we get to about $84,000, that's when Reggie and Regina, because of their income, they begin to phase out of this lifetime learning education credit, which has a net effect to their tax bill of 6%. And again, you can look at the additional $1,000 of ordinary income to test any of this math out that you'd like to. But the net effective rate on losing out on that non-refundable education tax credit is 6%. So eventually that becomes phased out entirely, and now we're looking at a more simple two colors again: the medical expense deduction phase out and the ordinary income tax. And again, you have the Medicare premium thresholds here as we covered previously. There is a summary chart that you can look at. If we click on that, this will show you, essentially each line is showing you anytime there's a break in the slope of that black total federal tax impact line. So at 37,000, we have a bend upwards. 38,000, we have another bend downward a little bit, or upward and then downward. And so each one of these data points right here, are a part on the graph where this slope changes. So some people find the chart helpful. It's going to show you the effective tax on that last $1,000, but it's also going to show you the total tax bill as you progress down that line, as you progress horizontally down that graph. All right. We promised we'd look at capital gains. Again, so just to cement this home, really just to kind of put a bow on this, even though it looks like at this point, $11,000, $12,000, that's at the point where their itemized deductions equal their taxable, or equal their adjusted gross income. Therefore, their taxable income is zero. However, because of the non-refundable credits they have that phase in as you actually have a tax bill, what we're saying is that with Reggie and Regina, if this scenario were real life, you could essentially create ordinary income of $35,000 for them and have no federal tax impact whatsoever, and no tax bill. That's kind of powerful to know. Maybe you want to do a Roth conversion of 35,000 this one year. Maybe this is a unique year where they have art classes and residential energy credits. This tells me that if we wanted to, we could do a $35,000 taxable Roth conversion and not add a single penny to Reggie and Regina's tax bill. So that's very powerful to be able to use this tool to be able to tell that. Looking here at capital gains, it's a little bit different. As you notice, here's where we start to have a bend up in that black line, suggesting that we start having some real taxable impacts at 35,000. But here's something strange. On capital gains, we don't have it until 85,000. And the reason these are different, we'll go back to the scenario. The reason these are different, let me go back up here. Let's scroll a little bit too far. What we have here is we have you're limited to negative $3,000 on capital losses. We have $5,000 of losses that are getting carried over. They won't be carried over if we add in additional long-term capital gains, which uses up that carry forward. In addition to that $5,000, they are still in that 0% tax bracket, right? So it all depends on the nature of the income that you add. So again, 12,000, then we add in the 5,000. We also have that 0% long-term capital gains bracket. That's why this is sitting at zero for so long. We see the red here. This is when they start bumping into that 15% bracket. At this point, that additional income tax is going to be long-term capital gains rate, which is taxable income, which means they have a tax bill, which means that they can use up this credit that they didn't fully utilize before with this initial increase in AGI, which made more of the Social Security benefits taxable. Again, so ordinary income and capital gains, they could look similar, or they could be like this, where they split out, where one starts at a lower dollar of additional income versus a very much higher amount of additional income based on the nature of income, whether it's capital gains or ordinary income. And again, so I wanted to also call, so we have taxable income and ordinary income here, the baseline, which is represented by 0. On the capital gains chart, we also show taxable income, but we also show baseline long-term capital gains and qualified dividends. So what you're seeing here is they're using up that $10,000 of capital gains, which is the $5,000 carryover, using up the $3,000 of loss that they have on top of that, and qualified dividends as well. That's why you're seeing the difference here in those two graphs as far as where that black line starts to tick up and result in a positive tax impact for your clients. So those are the two. I think I have a couple more here to show you. Yeah, I'll just show these really quick. And if you have any questions that were not answered so far, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. And if Shane can't get to them, I'll try to leave the last 5 minutes here for any questions and answers. But wanted to show you this basic Roth conversion. I'm going to use this to kind of bend this over. And again, I'm going to use the comparison tool. So this is the baseline that we first looked at with the 3 colors. And this is adding $1,000 of ordinary income. So we'll consider it like a $80,000 Roth conversion. And just to kind of go back and show you what that was. Again, we're looking at this. This is the initial range calc graph we looked at. And we're going to see $80,000 is right in the middle of that red section right here, right? So assuming we add $80,000 of Roth conversion income to that baseline, I would expect our new 0 point to be right in the middle of this red area. It's going to reset. Let's take a look. Let me just close out of this. And now we're going to run range calc on the scenario 2, which again, the only difference is that I've added $80,000 of Roth conversion income, which has made more of their Social Security benefits taxable and increased all those other income numbers downstream. So when we run this range calc, again, this is $80,000. So we expect the 0 to be right in the middle, and it is. It's right in the middle of that red section. One thing I did want to show you just to illustrate how this shows up. One thing that not all advisors are aware of, you can run a tax report from any projected scenario. So I'm going to run this tax report on this $80,000 of Roth conversion. We saw that the 0 line was right in between that red area, right? It's right in the middle. So I wanted to show you what that looked like. So what we ended up having was taxable income was $100,000. The trigger for 2024 is $94,000. So of that $10,000, since we're straddling that red area, we can have a portion of those long-term capital gains be taxed at 0% and a portion taxed at 15%. It's not right down the middle, but it's pretty close, right? So this is something that sometimes advisors have told us they're not aware of. Just like you can bleed, you can have income, this amount of income is taxed 10%, this amount at 12, this amount at 22, and so forth. The same holds true with these long-term capital gains rate brackets as well. You can straddle the brackets, and you can have a portion of this long-term capital gains or qualified income. You can have a portion of it taxed at 15 and a portion at 0. It doesn't all have to fit into the 15 or the 0. It can split between 2 or 3. In fact, there's one scenario I have there sitting in the bank where they're filling up all 3 long-term capital gains rate buckets. But I'll just pause right there. I know we're getting close to the end of time, and I wanted to make sure I covered any questions that were still there. Okay. So it looks like Shane's answering one of them. Adam had a question about, from a tax planning perspective, when we see a hill early on in range calc, what is the key takeaway? Is it to not down the hill as stated by Kitsis. In other words, punch through it to the other side. Good question, Adam. So I'm going to look back at one of these hills. So here's an example. And Adam, tell me if, please comment if this isn't answering your question, but I think this will. So yeah, not dying on the hill. I think Kitsis has used that, as well as Jeff Levine, who's also a good friend of ours here at Holistic Plan, is also going to be. Side note: if you want to nerd out on taxes, our tax summit coming up at the end of April, it's going to be super insightful, informative, really fun, at least for tax nerds like us. But yeah, not dying on the hill. What this means is that that is an approach that some advisors will think about. What I would think about these hills as are tax torpedoes that you may not have been thinking of. And when I say that, Adam, what I mean is oftentimes we'll get a question, hey, I want to do enough Roth conversion to max out their 10% bracket. In theory, that's a good idea. But is the client aware of this tax torpedo? Maybe they're okay with having 85% of their benefits taxable. And in this case, I can make the argument that, yeah, we should punch through and maybe maximize it at 12, or excuse me, maximize the 10% bracket. I could also make an argument that with tax rates being where they are historically, let's keep going. Let's convert some more. While we at Holistic Plan can't recommend a certain amount of conversion or a certain planning strategy, these hills should give you some discussion points, I guess would be the best way to put it, Adam, of maybe having that conversation with your client. Hey, we can convert 13,000. It's going to make your benefits 85% taxable. We think it's worth it because you're still in that 10% marginal bracket. It just creates discussion points, if you will. Same thing with this red area here. Maybe they have a lot of qualified income and you don't want to trip over and create a 27% tax liability or effective tax rate for that slice. But to your point, this is the tax report for that. Let me just make sure I think this is the $80,000 one. Yeah, $80,000 of ordinary income. Even though we're showing, wrong one, let me get into there. Even though we're showing this $80,000 of income is being taxed at a 27% effective rate, that's just for that red slice. And so the question becomes, cumulatively, all the way back here and beyond zero, is the effective rate low enough that it would make sense to do that Roth conversion anyway? Again, this red chunk right here, this width, this certain segment of income from 74 to 84 or 85 roughly, that $10,000 chunk, that's the chunk that has the effective rate of 27%, not the entire amount of income. And that's best illustrated. Again, this is that $80,000 where the effective rate on this $5,900 was 27%. But when we look at the overall cumulative number, their average rate is 8.5%. Their effective rate is 11%. So it's all a discussion point, really, when you look at those hills. But it still may make sense to not die on the hill, similar to what Kitsis and Jeff talk about. Because any income beyond that point, you're looking at a relatively low effective rate of 10 or 12% on income beyond that. So think of these as big bulges in effective rate that are smoothed out by these lower amounts. They're smoothed out by these lower amounts, and the effective rate that happened before the zero happened on the graph. If that makes sense. So yeah. So again, this effective rate is 27%, but that combined with the entire scenario, all the way back to their negative, their effective rate is zero for a large period of that time. So, or for a small period of that time. So I think the best way to think about those hills are discussion points for your clients about what are they comfortable with, if that makes sense. Yeah, and Adam, you said it's often client needs money, so you have to deal with the hill somehow. And yeah, that's sometimes the case. The best way to see the cumulative tax hit, yeah, that's on the tax report, Adam. But as a reminder, you also can pull up this summary chart as well. to see, in this case, we're looking at the $80,000. So the total tax is, that would be the total tax there with that scenario with $80,000 plugged in, which would again tie back to this $11,000 number here for total tax, which again can be seen on the tax report. Whichever way is most, whichever way is best understood by your client, you can see it on the tax report. Yeah, you can see it on the tax report. You can see it on this summary chart within Range Calc, and you can also see it in scenario analysis itself, just down here looking at the total tax and comparing those scenarios. You know, maybe you're showing your client, this is where we are right now. Here's what we're thinking. This is going to mean an increase of $11,000 in your taxes, but we think it's worth it based on the effective rate and where rates are headed. So, all right, I think that's thanks all the questions we have. We are a little bit beyond time, so I do want to be respectful of time. I'm going to share the results of our poll, which is really disheartening to me as a Peeps fan. But the crowd has spoken. 82% of you say you're over Peeps and you'd rather have something else. But thank you for sharing all your favorite candies in the chat. That was really fun. I think it's fun to have, you have to have some fun with taxes because they can wear on you from time to time. It can be taxing, pardon the pun, to think about taxes all the time. But yeah, I think that answers all the questions we had. Yep. So I think we're all done. Thanks for joining us today. I wish we had more time to go over Range Calc, but there's always time in tax planning land to always do another scenario. But thanks for joining us. Again, we will be getting this out to you either today or tomorrow. And just a reminder, anytime you want to sign up for any of our upcoming webinars we have, you can go to your dashboard and see the upcoming webinars here. Again, thanks for joining us. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. Hopefully an extra long weekend. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time here at Holistic Plan. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.